This is the cheapest tent in Australia that comes in at just $13. And this is my ultralight hiking tent that retails for about $300. And these are a couple options in between. And if you're in Australia and want to get into hiking, or maybe you're just looking at tents for festival camping, you're probably going to end up with one of these 4 options or something really similar. So in this video, I'm going to go through the price, specs and features of all of them, because when it comes to budget gear in Australia, we don't really have the same brands as the US and Europe. So you're a little bit fish out of water if you're trying to do some research. So I'm really hoping that this will help some people, because we have a $13 tent, a $30 tent, a $100 tent, and a $300 tent. Now, I was absolutely not planning on making a video today, but I needed to clean a couple of these, so I figured I'd just set them all up at the same time. Chuck out an extra couple so that we have something to compare them between. Because as someone who's in Australia, who's only just gotten into through hiking in the last couple of years, trying to find information about what products are kind of here in Australia is really difficult, so I'm really hoping that this will help some of you. Let's do a very quick overview of why I've picked these 4 different tents, and then we can go back through and we'll go over the actual specs and features of each of them. This is the Nest and Seek 2-person tent from BigW, and that's right, this is right now only $13. And not only that, is it actually weighs in at 1.3 kilos, which if you've already started looking at hiking tents, you will know that that's on the lower end of what you could expect to get at budget tents. In fact, you usually won't get to a tent that is below that weight again until you're spending over $300, usually closer to about $600. Next up, this is the 3-person camper tent, which this actually comes from Kohl's special buy of all things. This was at retail full price, $50. I bought it for $25 on clearance. This is here to represent your sort of standard budget 2-person tent that you will normally get from any outlet. This will be available from every camping store, Kmart, Target, BigW, that will normally run you that $30 to $50 sort of price range. This is very similar in material, quality, specs, and everything that all of those sort of tents are. So I've pulled this out today to help you understand where those sort of tents fit into this consideration or range of budget hiking tents. Next up, we have the Oz Trail Nomad 1-person hiking tent, which in Australia, this is kind of the default, if we could have such a thing, budget or entry level dedicated hiking tent. The retail price on this is about $110 to $120, but realistically, this is always on sale somewhere. BCF and Anaconda, and also tons of places online will all stock this tent, and usually one of them's going to have it on sale for about $80, $85. Mine, I got brand new, $50 off Marketplace. But I suspect half of you that are watching this video have probably scoped this out as probably your main default option. And this is the Naturehike Star Trail 1 single person, semi-freestanding hiking tent. This is a lot more of an intermediate option, but if you can pick it up on sale, I got mine for about $160. Then it does start to become a lot more comparable to something like the Nomad one. Again, this retails for about $300. Realistically, I think you would never pay more than about $220 for it. But if you don't know, this is basically a Chinese dupe of a very popular ultralight hiking tent called the Neo Osmo Dragonfly, I believe. But that tent retails for about $850 Australian. But what's crazy about this is it weighs under a kilo all the way down to about 720 grams, depending on how you configure it, and I'll get back to that later. But let's get back to the Nest and Seek. So this Nest and Seek 2-person tent, which is only $13 from BigW, does have some pretty big pros and some pretty considerable cons. All right, let's talk about the pros of this tent. It is $13. That's unbelievable. That is ridiculous. And $13 in a retail store as well. That's not like AliExpress or Temu. That is $30 you can walk into a store. If it sucks, you can take it back, sort of thing. It does have somewhat passable ventilation. Now we get into the cons in a minute, one of which is that this is a single wall tent. I'll explain what that means in a little bit if you don't know. But there is some ventilation. There is this mesh up the top, there is a mesh window around the back, and there is of course a fly screen that you can bring out in the front where you can get some ventilation. It will get pretty hot-ish in there, especially, God, I really wouldn't want to be warm weather camping in this because there is nothing down low to help you get any sort of air circulation. But other than that, it is a no-nonsense tent. It kind of is what it is. It's freestanding. It's fairly easy to set up. It packs down really small. That's pretty much it for the features. Let's talk about the cons. All right, there are 2 really big cons to this. One of this is the sizing. It is not as bad as what this camera angle is making it out to be, but it is pretty small. So on paper, the sizing is actually pretty good. It's about 120 centimeters wide and 190 centimeters long. But if we instead look at what I will call the functional space of the tent, which is where we go up about 10 centimeters and then measure the interior dimensions, because that's more realistically where you are going to be when you're sleeping and on a sleep mat, and also have like a pillow and also where your feet need to be. Then it's a lot smaller. It's only about 165 centimeters long and about 115 centimeters wide. Now I can fit my mummy sleeping pad in here however, I absolutely cannot lay down stretched out and not have either my feet or my head touching either the bottom or the top. Even lying diagonally, you're probably still going to be touching some walls, which wouldn't be that bad in some tents. And in some of these other tents, you will probably encounter that as well, but it's not going to be as bad. The reason that that's going to be a bit more of a problem in this tent is that it is single walled, which compared to the other tents probably is how it's getting that weight so low. 1.3 kilos as the full packed weight, which you can pull down a little bit with lighter weight pegs, not packing all of the stuff sack, the little bags that the poles come in, the little bag that the tent comes in. You can pull another little bit of that weight down again, but the way that it gets there is it is just a single wall tent. It is this fairly cheap, I believe, nylon material. It's definitely not ripstop, but I think if you're getting no rain or light rain, this would be completely fine. But when you have a single wall tent, the big issue that you run into with is condensation. Because you're generating warmth on the inside and it's coming to contact with the skin of the tent, which is going to be colder on the outside. And then all of the breath that you're breathing out, you end up with a really humid environment that will just form into water droplets that will just exist everywhere in the tent. And that means that if you are sleeping in it in a way to where you're touching the edge, you are going to end up with a very wet sleeping bag or pillow or feet. But yeah, if you're on a very tight budget and want to get into backpacking, then I think this is an okay choice. Just know that you'll probably be upgrading it after 1, maybe 2 trips. But I mean, really for $13, who can complain? I basically leave this tent set up in my shed now, and I just bring it out for my toddler to play in nearly every day. Oh, I forgot to mention, the feature that I actually do like is it has this rain fly, and it's just permanently fixed to the tent with this elastic cord. And then you just attach it on the other 4 corners. Very cool. And you still, I guess, get some ventilation, but unless it's raining, I would probably lean towards leaving it off, just so you get some sort of circulation. All right, next up we have the tent. This is the tent. This is the tent that everyone at some stage owns. You go into a shop that sells tents. They have a tent there that's $30. You buy the tent. This is about exactly what you get. So this is a whole lot of tent for not a whole lot of money, but that's also a bit of a downside for hiking, because this thing does weigh in at about 3.2 kilos with everything packed. And so Kmart's version of this is 2.3 kilos, so that doesn't have a vestibule, but that is still 3-person. But you're gonna be in that sort of range. So you're definitely not in this 2-3 kilo sort of price range, but you are getting a very good tent. This exact one I have stayed for in a week straight in like cold weather camping. It handled rain and wind, and I don't think it snowed that trip, but is a 2-wall tent, which means that the main part of the tent is actually mostly mesh, and then we put this rain fly over the top of it. The big advantage to having that is just moisture management, that instead of all that moisture and condensation landing on the walls of the tent that you are basically in contact with, instead that can then just fall down the outsides on the actual outside of the tent, because you then have mesh in between you and the tent. And you also, and it'll be the same with all these, you also just get the option to have basically a bug net and then take the rain fly off and then just sleep under the stars with no bugs. Now, I'm not gonna bore you with the specs of this exact tent too much, because I really do want this to represent that sort of generic spot, because there's a new version of this every year from every different store. But some of the big things to look out for are just trying to get that double wall if you can. Having options to modify the ventilation. What I mean by that is if you have something like this where you have the windows that can zip up and down, so that if it's hotter, you can leave them open. If it's colder, you can close them. And all of these additional guy points to where you can bring this out further to create additional ventilation again. And the reason that works is because the mesh does come a long way down the tent into what's kind of, I think is just called the bathtub of the tent. And this will help keep you dry and comfortable temperature-wise, no matter if it's colder or warmer. But all in all, these are pretty great tents. This one does have a vestibule, which you really don't need unless the tent is tiny enough, which will make more sense with these other ones, to where you need this to try and store your gear. But what you make up for in a relatively durable, relatively inexpensive, and relatively feature-rich tent, you just lose in weight and bulkiness. But this one is definitely the biggest. You would probably struggle to fit this into a backpacking bag. You'll probably have to try and clip this to the outside. But if you just want something that's available everywhere that you can start your backpacking journey with, and you probably want to start with some shorter hike, then this is completely fine. A friend of mine on a recent hike was his first time hiking, and he took a tent not dissimilar to this. It was about 3.8 kilos maybe, and his total pack weight, including food and water, came in under 15 kilos, which is roughly, I think, like 35-ish pounds, which is the higher end of where you want to be with a beginner backpacking backpack. But it is completely possible to have something heavier like this and still have a very reasonable pack weight. Onto the Oz Trail Nomad 1, my first dedicated hiking tent, and if you're in Australia, probably half decent chance that it's yours as well. So this starts to hit on one of the first things that you'll notice when you start looking at hiking tents, in that they all usually have some sort of funky design, usually in one way or another, to still leave it as a very functional tent but try and cut some weight. With this one, it is not a freestanding tent, whereas the other two are. So it only actually has one single tent pole that runs all the way across the top, and then the way that it stays up is just with tension by actually pegging it all out. And this one also ends up in a very interesting hexagonal design, where instead of a rectangle, you end up with 2 points and then two kind of walls that come in towards each other. This is also a double wall tent, and it also has these two cool vents with these like semi-rigid little rods that are just built into the tent that can help you pull them out to help get a bit of ventilation in there as well. It is made from a fairly tough feeling nylon material. The exact specs of it are on their website, I'll put it up, but my hand on it says it's probably 30 denier, which if you don't know is basically just the thickness of it. So I think what's quite interesting with the Nomad one is that I think someone has actually tried to have a really good crack at creating a good budget hiking tent, because I think there are some really big similarities and differences between this and your typical $30 tent. And for the rest of the video, I'll call the camper just the $30 tent. Noticeably, the bottom material is no longer that cheap woven tarp-like material. This is actually the same nylon that the rainfly is made out of. This rainfly is actually basically the exact same material quality as the $30 tent. However, it is again noticeable that the inner mesh of the tent is a higher quality mesh than what you get in the other two tents. This does have a lot of options with how you peg it out to also change the way the airflow works in it. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a second with the cons. You do get a little bit of a kind of gear loft for it. It is fairly big for a one-person tent. It's definitely bigger than the Naturehike that we'll take a look at in a second. So when I've hiked with this, it hasn't been big enough to also just bring my backpack into the tent itself, just chuck it down on the foot end, and we all sort of fit. In an emergency situation, I think you could fit 2 people in here. It would just be very tight and cozy. I think one of the big tricks that they almost missed with this tent is I wish that there was a way just to guy out or something like that, or maybe use trekking poles to just create a little bit of a vestibule or sunshade just with this outer part of the fly. Something that might grab you that you might think is a little bit weird is how you are immediately exposed to the elements once the tent's unzipped. Like, once it's unzipped, you are underneath the sky. And at first I did think that was kind of weird. If it was raining, that would suck, but you also, I mean, you would be getting wet anyway. But where I found that this is really good actually is just putting your shoes on or standing up and then putting your jacket on, because you can stand straight up, be standing on the base of the tent, and then you can actually operate up here. Maybe like balance, get your shoes on or whatever. The rainfly, you can get out at the front a little bit. So I have done things like leave shoes or sandals or whatever out the front. It does have 2 little interior storage pockets. It does have a hook up the top to put your light on. One of the other big things that I don't like about the way the interior of the tent works is the mesh does just kind of droop down a little bit, which can kind of limit how big it feels. But that's also another issue with the Naturehike as well. But you do fit in here fairly comfortably. This does officially come in weighing at, I believe, 1.9 kilos. When I weighed it myself, it's actually more like 1.7. Some of the things that I really don't like about it are the way that you insert the tent poles. It is fairly old-fashioned in that it doesn't have clips. You just insert the tent pole through the fabric like tubes to then go along. It does make putting it up a little bit more annoying. The way the design of the tent works is if you want to actually pull out the full rainfly to be fully ventilated, the entire tent requires about 17 pegs. That includes the 2 guy rope pegs, which does really start to crank up the weight of the tent. So a really affordable upgrade that I did with this nearly immediately is going on Amazon and then just buying some aluminum hiking pegs to replace these budget J pegs with, which did help drop the weight of the tent another 100 grams or so. And the other thing is that because of that design, you actually can't close the ventilation that easily. When I have been camping with it and I've been too cold, there is no way to really pull the rainfly closer to the mesh. You still, at a minimum, end up with about a 10 centimeter gap at the bottom, which still lets plenty of cold air in and flowing over the tent. So the outer shell of my sleeping bag was really cold sleeping in it. But yeah, other than that, really passable. Just try and get it on sale or secondhand. It is definitely a tent that you don't immediately feel the need to upgrade with, whereas with the other 2, I think you would. My plan was to not upgrade from this for another year or so, but then opportunities came up for me to get a tent cheap. All right, the Naturehike is unquestionably a dedicated hiking tent. Everything from the way that it feels to all of the little clips to the types of pegs that it comes with. This is very obviously a hiking tent, as opposed to the Nomad, where it does feel a lot more like a standard budget tent repurposed and redesigned into the shape of a very passable hiking tent. Everything about this screams dedicated hiking tent. And now Naturehike is not really a reputable brand. It's a Chinese made brand. And like I said, this is a dupe of a much more expensive tent. But I think this is also gonna do a really good job at representing both itself and also intermediate hiking tents, which is anything about $600 down to $200 to $150, something like that. That sort of price range is pretty much where you're getting to this. So first of all, the big ticket item with this is that it is super light. It's between 930 and about 750 grams, depending on how you configure that. The reason that there is such a big discrepancy there is that it basically comes with some optional parts. Those are the things like the stuff sacks, the compression band that you can wrap around with the tent bag itself. But also this comes with a ground sheet, which once you get into more intermediate and advanced hiking tents, you will find that a lot of people use ground sheets because it is only an extra couple 100 grams or so, and it helps protect your sometimes $1,000 plus tent. This one does come with a ground sheet, many don't. A lot of people actually just use like builder's plastic as a budget ground sheet that does as good of a job as anything. But if you're just getting into hiking and backpacking, something that I really recommend that you do is in your nearest camping store, try and go and check out whatever the most expensive ultralight hiking tent that they have and look at the specs if that's all they have, or if you can, like, go and touch it and feel it and stuff, and you will very quickly appreciate that there are huge diminishing returns between something like the Nomad one and then a lot more of these intermediate and advanced tents. You realize there's not actually that big of a difference, or if anything, you're paying a lot more extra money for not just a strict upgrade, but just a side grade. This definitely does not feel anywhere near as like rugged and durable as the fly material of the other tent. This is 10 denier ripstop nylon, which feels very thin. I don't know if this will pick up on camera, but you can literally see my hand through it. The base and the ground sheet are both 20 denier ripstop nylon, and the mesh is this very, very fine and lightweight mesh, nowhere near as rugged as the other tent. And this is actually also slightly smaller than the Nomad because they're both kind of funky shaped. This one tapers in a little bit, so it's, I guess, more of a coffin shape, for lack of a better term, and the Nomad, like I said, is that slightly hexagonal shape. It's a little bit difficult to compare them, but the Nomad's functional space is roughly 190 centimeters by 90. This is more like 185 centimeters long by, I mean, at its widest point, this is about 1 meter. At its shallowest point, about 60. On average, sort of where your chest and stuff's gonna be, it's about 75 centimeters across. So some of the big pros of this, even though it is internally smaller, you do actually get this little vestibule gear loft for it so that you don't have to bring your backpack into the tent. You can actually leave it outside here, which that is exactly what this additional extra space is designed for. My biggest gripe with this because there's a feature that the Neo Osmo Dragonfly, the sort of tent that's almost, I'm not sure if it's a copy or if they're just the same style of tent, but something that that tent has that this one doesn't is it doesn't have the volumizer, which the mesh on this tent tends to droop in a little bit, and you can't really get it any tighter. The way that the Dragonfly solves this is there are lines that you can attach to your Rainfly, which you can get a lot tighter, just to help pinch out the mesh, but this doesn't have that. So it is very easy for the mesh to kind of just be touching you while you're in the tent. But I guess that's the same thing with basically all of these tents. Something else that's different about this tent that is actually a bit of a upgrade is that it comes with aluminium tent poles, whereas everything else has been fiberglass so far. So that's another way that starts to really help cut down on the weight. Another thing is that it's not advertised as it, but from what I can tell and comparing to my other titanium products, I believe the hiking tent pegs that this comes with may actually be titanium. These only weigh 5 grams each, and my aluminium hiking tent pegs, well, they are a fair bit bigger, do weigh 13 grams, and they're titanium color. They do feel really similar density to like my titanium spoons and pots and stuff, so I think they are. And these also have these awesome little adjustable like guy ropes to everything, whereas everything on the other tents are all either just nylon straps where you just have to pull it and put the peg in, or they are elastic, but these are really great at just kind of nailing in the exact tension that you want. So when fully pegged out, this does require only 7 or 9 pegs, so that is a noticeable drop. Something else that's just my biggest gripe with the Nomad one is just how many pegs you have to carry for it. There is a single little storage pocket in this tent. One upgrade that I think I'm gonna have to just try and work out to do with it is just down the head end, because of the way that this end just sags in a bit. Is you could get, it's just a little bit too small for how tall I am, and I'm only 178 centimeters, but once I have like my hiking pillow or whatever, I'm gonna work out a way just to attach my own homemade version of a volumizer to just pull it out a little bit, and then it will be like a 10 out of 10 tent. That's the only real con with it so far. I've had it out in the rain, it was great. I put it up in the wind by accident, and it was difficult but manageable to put out in the wind. It does thankfully have the tent pole clips where you put the tent down and then the tent poles in the corners, and then you just lift it up and clip it on. The advertised setup time for this is 3 minutes, which I think wouldn't be that far off once you get used to it, especially working out which lines can share with what tent pegs. But yeah, this is fantastic. The only concern would be long-term durability, which I can't let you know today, but I will come back to you in a year or so and tell you how that's gone. This is a very impromptu and unplanned video, so if there's any details you want to know about these tents that you might have missed, because it is pretty difficult finding out info about this stuff, just let me know in the comments. I will try to get back to you. If you do want to check out more Aussie hiking content, I can't recommend the channel Set to Hike highly enough, but give this video a green thumbs up. This is the first hiking or camping related video that I made on this channel. So let me know if you like it, click subscribe. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. The filming of this video is delayed by an hour because one of the tents had a spider in it.